De aguas profundas retornaron al corazón verde, su hogar amado. Marcando las piedras cuentan su paso en Chiribiquete, el eco sagrado. Hija del río, alma del agua, su espíritu canta con la cascada, belleza eterna, naturaleza, en sus venas corre la selva espesa. Mira junto al agua.
En sombras creció, entre espinas andó, pero como el jaguar fuerte se mostró. De las pruebas salió, con el sol se alzó, su historia en las piedras ella grabó. Balama la grande, de fama inmortal, como petroglifos, su mito es real. Hija del río, voz del jaguar, su nombre en la brisa siempre perdurará. Balama, la grande, de fama inmortal, como petroglifos, su mito es real. Hija del río, voz del jaguar, su nombre en la brisa siempre perdurará.
Oh, Balama.
Hey folks, this is Layron with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. That was a theme song that I put together with some AI. This is storytelling. One of the stories that I've been working on for probably about 2 years is the story of Bayama. She's essentially kind of like a young woman who is kind of supernaturally blessed by nature, and she is the daughter of a very powerful and tyrannical Jaguar clan king. Essentially, she runs away from home and kind of goes out on her own. She befriends this little Jaguar, and they kind of grow up together. And she kind of turns into kind of like a ranger type, it's kind of a wilderness warrior, but then she has some supernatural ability. So I've been working on the stat block for her. Essentially, she's a fighter, but she has the natural affinity for jaguars, and she also has kind of like it's called an invigorating Restoration or something. It's basically a pared down version of Second Wind. So instead of a D10, it uses a D8, and she can only use it in the jungle. So if she's in any other environment, she can't really use that ability. And then she has a spear and a dagger, essentially that she uses. She has one maneuver with the spear, so if she uses it two-handedly or one-handed, she can make a reaction to use the butt end of it to kind of like do a counter strike, or she can do a bonus action and kind of spin it around and use the butt end of it to hit somebody. But essentially, she's just a warrior in that regards. But as far as the story goes, got quite a huge backstory for her. She's been on my mind for a long time, and I don't know what it is about it, but I had like a dream about it, and it just sang to me. It just kind of made me think about the story, and I was just kind of inspired by that. I also used some generative AI to come up with some story elements, and even before that, I had this picture of her mind where I kind of saw her whole life, in front of her, and I almost like felt like I was living through her story, through the game and stuff. So, creating kind of like a themed world where it kind of has like this jungle environment, and it essentially is kind of based loosely off of South American, Central American cultures. Little bit of kind of borrowing a little bit of everything from different worlds, different game systems. Essentially, right now I have it based on 5e, but it could probably go into like Savage Worlds or even Pathfinder if you wanted to. I know they have the Mwangi expanses and such, so it would work really well with that. But nonetheless, Bayama was a young girl who kind of grew up and kind of had a rough life. I started with her family and her backstory, like how she was brought about and all kinds of cool stuff. So essentially, it's like I don't know why I'm doing it, to be honest. It just feels like the story needs to be told. It's basically a story of survival and the coming of age, and also just kind of a fact fictional thing where I'm kind of doing research on the different cultures in South America before the pre-colonial days, before the Spanish. And I really wish I would have paid more attention in school because there's a lot of interesting information. However, I remember back then that we always learned about Christopher Columbus, and we always learn about the colonization part of things, like the Spanish and the English. We don't really learn a whole lot about the indigenous people. I know that a long time ago, when the Spanish first arrived in the Americas, they were kind of freaked out because there was some stuff there that they couldn't explain, like all those megalithic temples and all the kind of lore, and the religion or the beliefs that they had were completely different than the Christian beliefs. So they, eventually all that culture got erased by colonization and such, unfortunately, and a lot of information is lost. And I just felt like I'm not really motivated by politics or by race politics and such, but I really think that there's something missing from our lives in regards to information that we should be knowing. And I think doing it through the game is kind of therapeutic, and it kind of helps tell the story. It gives you a little bit more context and content for for building these types of elaborate stories, especially when you get into world building. And you got to have some inspiration or you're going to burn out really quick. And I don't know what you guys do or how it works for you, but this thing's been stuck in my head for months, and I'm just now getting around to building stuff for it. Right now I'm kind of building I guess you could say it's like assets for this kind of setting. And then also I made, like I said, I was making those AI songs that for Bayama, the Jaguar princess. So she doesn't start off as a princess, but later on in life she does become like a princess, and it's kind of a tragedy, to be honest, because the way her mother and her father grew up, and then just the situations and the circumstances around her birth and all, it's just so in depth. I don't even know where to start because it kind of just begins before her birth, and it kind of just flowers out into this story about how she's like this almost supernatural kind of individual, and it kind of used the magic and D&D or fantasy type stuff to kind of illustrate some of that stuff, but I didn't want it to be overly magical, kind of low magic. And if you guys remember the old I think first second edition box set from Mazda, that was a really cool setting. I really liked it a lot. I wish it hadn't gone away, but I know over time, I guess someone complained about some of the information not being historically correct, or I don't know what happened, but TSR stopped doing those type of settings because I really liked them because they're kind of based on history, like Mazda or Al-Qadim or any of those kind of you know stories that and settings that were kind of cool. But it was okay to do a kind of a Western Eastern European thing with Strahd. I mean, that was basically based off of Western culture, but I don't know. I just think that we have a lost opportunity with our own real history to kind of blend that in with our fantasy games without having the stigma of treading on somebody's feelings or something like that. It's just ridiculous. But anyway, so this is kind of what I'm working on, is just kind of working on these assets, and I thought I would share like the song that I played earlier was based off of the story that I made, and then I translated it into Spanish because I think it sounded better, and it sounded very tribal and mystical and stuff. And then I made an English version that didn't really, I don't know, it's okay, but it just seemed like not quite as powerful or something. Even though I can't understand the Spanish very well, I kind of liked it because it has that, I don't know, had a feel to it that seemed more authentic than just throwing up some song with the English version. But it wasn't an exact translation or anything either. So that's another thing, is that it was something that I would put together that I thought would be interesting, and it, I don't know, I just thought it was kind of different. But so right now I'm working on a decal that I might use for the background. I don't know if my heart's not set on it, but I'm going to make a folder called decal, even though that you don't have to do that. And then this is what it looks like, kind of. Let me see. I want to open this with just the Photoshop thing, or with this. So this is the picture. And this is a combination of AI. It's a combination of a real photo, and I use some plugins and such to kind of fix the face and such. Because if you used generative AI tools, you can kind of tell that it's messed up. But this is the final result, kind of like a variety of tools to create this image. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's art, but it's definitely a really nice picture. And then what I want to do is in this picture here, you can make your own decals and backgrounds and fantasy grounds. But whenever you add pictures or take them away or rename them, you want to hit this refresh, and then you go back to your campaign folder. And then in here, you can open up, here's the decal, and then you can set this as your background. So I think that turned out pretty nice. And what I like about the torn pages is you kind of have that effect where it looks like it's coming out of the page instead of just a flat image. So I thought that was kind of fun. So I might go in and touch this up a little bit more, but I think that for the most part, just having some inspiration, I guess, and some kind of imagery and music and stuff kind of gets you in the mood to create stuff. And I think that's an important aspect of world building and telling a story, is having that immersion. So that's kind of what I've been doing is for the last hour or so, is just kind of going through some of my assets that I've been building. And I wanted to share that with you guys because this is the stuff you normally don't get to see. I think a lot of times when you look at product or you look at things that people are building, it's already pretty much done. And you don't really get to see the work or the process that goes into it. I know it can be kind of boring, like sitting there watching somebody paint, but some people actually kind of like that stuff. But I'm going to take all of this information here. This is the stuff I've been working on, like artwork and tokens and all kinds of stuff. And I'm going to put this into the Fantasy Grounds folder in the back end here. So if I go back to assets and then click on images, and then go to folder. These are all the subfolders that are within this campaign. And then I'll just go ahead and paste this stuff in here. And I'll probably have to reorganize it because there might be some duplicates in here. But for the time being, I'm just kind of just taking this and running with it. And this is the, what is this? This is the English version kind of this Bayama story. I hope you guys like it. If it bothers you, if it's too loud, let me know. So let's check it out, see how it turned out.
Where have you gone? You remain unseen. Are you crossing the river or climbing the mighty Sumomera trees? In the depths of the verdant wilderness, where the wild orchids bloom, nature whispers secrets under the filtered moon. With a step soft as moss, under canopies unseen, the heart of the jungle, a warrior princess, soon to be queen. Low in the jungle breeze, listen to nature's cry. Bayama's spirit roams where the canopy meets the sky. Come to the wild, my friends, where the jaguar roam in the lush green world. Bayama calls home. See the shadows dance in the twilight's silken mesh. A shadow black as night moves silent, its fur and flesh, under the ancient trees where the spirits coalesce. Bayama and her companion in a dance of survival in the dense wilderness. Raised in the heart of the jungle, where humid heat and rainy seasons command, lessons from nature learned by necessity's demands. Bayama knows the secrets of these ancient sacred lands. In her jungle home, forever she stands.
Anyhow, that was one of the attempts that I had made for creating some kind of theme music for it. And right now what I'm doing is taking these images and trying to place the three-dimensional definition file for those so that when you're using them in the 3D view, it will help make that look a little bit better as far as the angle, the perspective, that sort of thing. So I'm going to test these out, see how they look. But I wanted to show you another really cool thing that that I discovered. So when you have images, like in this case, there could be all number of things that, hey, what's up, Dan? That you would come across. So I made some tiles. So tiles can be made fairly easily. Like these are just like jungle-like tiles. They're square. They don't really have any, predefined definition or anything. They are square, and they are set to a point where if you put them next to each other, they'll connect. So you can go to a website, and let me see if I can find it again. Let's see, tile maker, I guess, is what I looked at. Okay, so artistic creation with tile maker. I think this is it. No. Anyways, there's a website, a free one, where you can make tile. I'll say tile image maker. Basically, you feed it whatever image you want tiled. Here we go. Okay, so this is the website. Okay, so This is a free tool, and I think I'll hold on to this for you guys to, I'll put this in the description of the video. But essentially, you can take something like this, and you can tile it and kind of make your own tiles. Well, if you use like a map, like a top-down image, you can make kind of like a small little like areas that are like 4x4. And what I was thinking is you could take something like this and make your tile, and then export it, of course, and you can put it in Fantasy Grounds and use that for one of those quick maps. So what I'm going to do is take like this tile, for instance, and click on Quick Map. Now this was made with a generative AI tool, but it also has the tiling on it, so that when you put them together, they link up. So let me go to Quick Map, and then what we're going to do is use this as a fill. And I think I'm just going to make this a small fill. I don't want it too big. And then I'll hit submit. And did it work? Maybe not. But nonetheless, you could take something like this and make a fill with it. And you can even take this and like tile it together if you wanted to. You can add more layers to it. Let me try this again. So what am I doing wrong here? So take this file, go to Quick Maps. Maybe it's because I don't have any use combat tracker or drag and drop encounter here. Oh, jeez. It's one of those things where if you don't do this, then you can't do that. And if you can't do that, then you can't do this. So I just want to test this out to see if it will fill. Let me try the standard one. Yeah, it's not quite working the way I expected, but I was hoping to get it to tile. Let me see. Maybe I need to do an encounter. If I have any loaded, that is. So, yeah, of course, probably don't have anything loaded. But I do have these Latin American monsters module loaded, and I do have some like jungle-like related stuff. So it's not like I don't have the content. Let me go through an NPC here and see what we got here. So let's go with this anaconda. Yeah, that's cool. So I'll drag that anaconda over here. And then what I want to do is, let's see, how am I going to fake it out here? So quick map, and then let's say use combat tracker or drag and drop encounter here. Okay, I see. So you can click on that. We'll put the enemy like right in the center, I guess. And then party will probably be in the middle. I don't know. Anyway, so the enemy will be there. Let's see if that does anything. And then uses fill. We'll go with small. See if that does anything. Yeah, see, it's not quite work. Maybe it's because it's too small, but here's the anaconda for this. So it does look pretty good. I mean, it's not like it looks horrible. It's just not behaving the way I thought it would. But that's the token. And let's see what happens if you put a grid on it. Yeah, that's not bad. I mean, it's nice and square. This kind of works for, for a quick map. That's perfect. So you can make these little like tiles that would essentially make like a jungle floor, and you can kind of make these a little bit bigger. Like maybe these flowers would need to be like big trees instead of bushes, But that's kind of a cool way to do that without having to have a big complex map. I do have some really nice maps, but there again, that's not a quick map. You're having to put the line of sight on it sometimes. There's just all kinds of work that can go into this. So these are like the Meander series that I really like. These are from Chris. I show these quite a bit in my videos, but these are kind of, you can tile these things together, which is really cool. I always like that. And there is a preview image where you can select a map at random, or you can, obviously select it. But these have really nice images in here. I'd probably use this for my adventure. So if I wanted to have a scenario with Bayama and her jaguar, I'd probably use something like this, and then use the quick maps for encounters that aren't covered here, And then I can actually take this image and probably make something look similar to it, and then make tiles for it. And that way, if I need to add to it or, have another map linked to it, that would be cool. use the drop down. I'm going to unlock it, put a grid on it. Let's see what it looks like. Yeah, that's pretty nice. And then I'm going to change the color of the grid. I always use like a weird, like a yellow color so I can kind of see it. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So these meander things, they line up. So if you have another one with like a waterway on there, they kind of link together. So it's kind of cool. But this is a really cool way to kind of gain that immersion you might be looking for your players and for yourself. I don't know if you guys get burned out, but you know, you have the same kind of assets over and over and over, you know, same kind of maps. It just gets really stale. And that's one of the things about telling a story is you kind of have to be passionate about it. When you're telling someone else's story, you have to kind of read through it and buy into it. But when you're making your own stories, it's a lot more creative, and I think you get a little bit more invested in it than with a typical adventure that you would just buy off the shelf, because that story's been told so many different ways and so many different times by the time you get to it. And it just seems like even though you can make it your own, it just seems kind of anticlimactic, I guess, is what I'm looking at. I just would rather kind of have my own thing going on, and you can do whatever you want. You know, you can build off of a foundation, which is kind of what they want you to do, is just take this information, these drawings, these settings, and these tokens and these maps, and do what you want with them. But when you have it to where you've built it yourself and it's from the ground up, you know, that really helps with that immersion. And I think that's a really important aspect of, you know, world building and telling a story. So this Bayama individual, like I said, I had a dream about this, and I had really put some thought into it, and I've used, like, you know, my own thoughts. I've used generative AI. I've used borrowed from other cultures and all kinds of stuff. So it's a combination of different aspects of myself and from, you know, using the tools that are available out there. And I think that one of the things that kind of inspired me was a story, and that without that, I think it would just be images and a couple tokens and maybe an encounter, right? But when you actually have an entire story, now I know the whole history of Bayama and her family and how she met the jaguar and, you know, everything. So if I ever ran this as an adventure or wrote a book or created a role-playing game product, I would have all that stuff ready to go. It is a lot of extra work, though. I mean, it takes some dedication and time, but I'm telling you, it's more rewarding and a lot more fun for you as a game master if you're that invested in it. And that's kind of like having a passion about anything, right? It's like, you know, you can go to a baseball game and watch it, right? That's kind of fun for 1 or 2 afternoons, but until you actually play or you coach it, and you know, you go to a championship and you get to go to all the tournaments and stuff, until that happens, it really doesn't, you know, it doesn't resonate too much, other than just being a super fan that buys everything, right? So I don't think that's wrong or bad. I just think that there's more investment in it as a game master and a storyteller when you kind of are able to come up with your own or build off of something that's already out there. But I think that this thing here, it just sings to me. I don't know why. I don't have any relatives or anything that has anything to do with this. It just, I don't know. It just kind of just keeps coming at me. Like, I just keep thinking about it. And the more I think about it, the more things that come up, and I'm like, wow, that would be so cool. And unfortunately, though, through an adventure, I can't tell that whole story at once. I mean, that has to play out over time. And there's things that players probably would never know that only I would know, you know, and that's kind of cool too, in a way. You don't want to give away everything, but in this case, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Bayama, but while I'm doing that, I'm going to test that token thing out. So let's go into, let's see. I wanted to go into the maps. I need like an NPC, you know, some kind of asset here. I'll just do a commoner for now. I mean, I do have her stat block, but I don't want to mess with that right now at the moment. So what I will do is take the, let's see, I need an NPC. That's what I need. So NPCs, let's go with, let's see if they have villager or something like that. Yeah, villager chief. Let's just do that for right now. I mean, he already has his own token, but I want to unlock it and use my own and see how it turns out. Just how to see if it works. And then I'll take, this could be like her father, right? Her father's name is Longtooth. He has a different name, you know, like a formal name, but Longtooth is his, kind of like his namesake that, when he first became chief, that's how he got the name. But that ties into the lore and the history and such. So let me go to the click on this thing here. So here's the flat token. I'm going to leave that, but I just want to mess with the camera token for right now. So if I go into assets and go back to my campaign folder and then go to this 3D section, this is where I had defined the token. So this is the one I did. So drag that there, maybe put this one here. And let's just see how that looks in the 3D mode. And then, of course, I need to put this on the combat tracker. That'll help too. Okay, so that's that. And now that quick map that I had might be nice, but let's see what it looks like here. So I'll drag village leader Bioma here. So this is the flat token, and so that's what it looks like. Not too bad. Now let's check out the 3D thing and see if it actually worked. Yeah, so it looks pretty good, like not too bad. Yep. So there's Bioma. Pretty cool. So it worked out the way I thought it would. And what I found out on this tool here, this is free by the way. I'll put that in the description, but Smiteworks published this in a video on how to use it. But essentially, you take an image like this, a PNG image, you cut out all the background stuff. I use GIMP to do that, or you can use a phone app or whatever. But once you have this isolated, then you set the top left and the bottom right, and then the expected grid height is going to be around 1. And then in this case, her height is going to be around 5 feet. She's probably like 4'11" or something like that, but I left it at 5 feet. If you have a vertical one like the cat, you're going to put that as 5 or 6 feet width with 1 square, unless it's a large creature. And what I had found out from Zacchaeus and from Doug is that this number here as the height is either 1, 2, or 3, maybe 4. But essentially, that anything that's small or medium is going to be 1 square. Anything large is 2. Anything huge or gigantic is going to be 3. So if you know that, just most of the time that's going to stay as 1. And then you can plug in the feet within feet. It doesn't take fractions or point whatever, so you have to get close as you can to the whole number. So if she's like 5'11", then put 6 feet in there. But that's basically how this works. And then once you set the top left, the bottom right, then you set your measurement scale, and then you set the center floor, which is the very pivot point of the image. So it's probably smack down the center here. And then you save the XML, and that allows you to load it with the image. So in Fantasy Grounds, that helps define the center point of this, the access point of this token. So the closer you get, the kind of weirder it looks. It looks distorted, but when you have them off like this, it looks really good. Like, it doesn't look as hokey as it would when you have it up close like this. The camera view changes, so sometimes it looks like they're leaning or it's like off, but it has to do with how you have the camera pivoted, and also this background, image, what that's like, and then also the quality of the token and such. So that's why they don't always look right. But that center point it cuts this in half. So when you move this, it rotates that image based off the camera. And then it kind of defines the space around it. So when you're moving and changing angle, like when you move the token, it's constantly trying to face you. And when you do that, it kind of distorts when you get really close. But when you get about here, I think it looks pretty good. And that has to do with the way it's perceived, the perspective, that sort of thing. But that's basically what I was working on. I wanted to make the cat now. I want to try her companion. So I should be able to find a jaguar in here and just use that for now. I mean, Shadow is its name. And I didn't even think about this, but it's essentially like Drist. I didn't even think about that until later when I was working. I said, this sounds like a Drist story to me, but it isn't. That the whole thing isn't, but it kind of does have some parallels to his story, which is funny. But there again, it's kind of borrowing off what you know, right? So it has to do with what you're exposed to, how much reading you've done, how much experience you have, all that stuff kind of plays in. So this is locked. So in order for me to edit this, I'm going to have to drag and make a copy. And now it's not part of the adventure anymore. So it's a copy of it. So now I can edit this image here and I can unlock it. So if you ever run into that where you want to edit a creature and you can't, all you have to do is drag it, drop it back in here in the same location, and then you can edit it at that point. So it's no longer part of the book. It's a copy now. And then what I want to do is click on the token, and I want to use my camera token that I defined earlier to see how that turned out. So I'm going to go to assets, and here's Shadow. Pretty neat looking. So let's see. All right, Shadow. Oops, where did he go? All right, here we go. All right, so here's Shadow with Jaguar. And let's see what it looks like on here. Yeah, gotta make it look, gotta unveil it here. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So Shadow looks all right. This turned out really nice, actually. I don't like that this thing is in its face, but other than that, it looks pretty cool. So I'll have to remember that. So since that thing sticks over here on the right-hand side, you got a creature like this, probably flip it the other way. So that way it's next to his butt instead of his face. This little dot's kind of annoying. But other than that, it looks like proportionate-wise, it looks pretty good. So that is basically, I think it looks good like maybe like that for scale. Make her just a tad bit taller. Yeah, it looks really good. I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah, I like it. So that's kind of what all I was really doing is testing the assets out, see what they look like, let you guys hear the theme songs that I made, and just kind of giving you some thoughts for how this story was formed. I took like an idea that was just like a character, and I kind of built a whole world around that, which is interesting because you have this small little sliver, and then all of a sudden, then you have this whole world. And that's what's really cool about role-playing games. It's like it kind of expands your mind. You're thinking about writing and reading and math and talking to people and communicating and creating art. And it's really positive. It's very cathartic, and it keeps you out of trouble for most part, unless you're buying a bunch of tokens like myself. But yeah, so this is a really fun way to express yourself, and it's not negative, and it doesn't usually bother anyone, but it's a good thing. It's healthy. It's one of those things that I think as a person, an individual, it can help you through life no matter what you're doing. And I think that it helps you become a leader or at least a creative person, and it kind of helps with those sort of things. So it's nice to not just be a consumer. I like buying stuff and having collecting, but I also like to make my own stuff too. And that's part of what the allure of role-playing games is, especially if you're a game master or content creators, you want to make stuff. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now. And I think that with this sort of inspiration, you can really build a very dynamic world, and you can kind of keep track of it using different tools. For instance, if you wanted to do some world building with your players, obviously you can use one of the portals. They have, what is that? There's something works. I can't remember what it was called. Realmworks. And then, of course, there's World Anvil. and there's other sites like that where you can kind of keep track of all your lore, all your NPCs, all that kind of stuff. But then also Fantasy Grounds has a tool that Damien built, which is kind of based, if you guys are around for a while, Deluxe Oz, I think, or someone like that had made thing. I don't remember the DOE locations or something like that, but Player Agency is an extension that kind of gives your players some interaction with Fantasy Grounds, so you can build. So what this does is it says that the GMs usually have a lot more to do than players, like game prep, game management, all that sort of thing, and to try to keep all these things together in a coherent game world, and with NPCs and everything else. So Virtual Tabletop gives you some really good tools to run encounters and stuff, but a lot of them don't have the built-in world building tools, and I think this is the reason behind this extension. So this allows you to flesh out your game world into like a more structured way using story entries. It supports places, groups, personalities, and religions. And there's 2 fields in each world builder record that contains information that's visible to players if the GM shares that. And in addition, the players can also add their own notes in another field that are visible to players and the GM. And then there's another tool called Investigator. It's a tool that allows the players to create their own shared and interactive clue sheets to track knowledge, and it leads into one location or the other. If the player creates a clue and sets it as public, the other can see it, and they can add their own notes. So this is kind of a really cool way to do stuff. There's a Dear Diary part where players can write their own campaign calendar diary type thing. And then it has support for players editing content from modules. So if the records are shared and not just loaded as the module, then the selection fields for players will be allowed where they can actually open and close a record. And but the suggestion here is if you allow for that for creating content, then make a new campaign only for that. So if you're going to build, with a bunch of people, maybe make a campaign work kind of build campaign instead of a live one. But that's pretty cool. I haven't used the tool yet, but I remember the DOE locations extension that used to be out, and I think Damien built off of that, or Damned built off of that. And it was kind of a cool thing to have, because you can drill down, like you start from the planet and the world and go all the way down to the last person. It's kind of a cool way of organizing information. But there's a video that kind of shows you how it works and everything. So if you're going to do world building in Fantasy Grounds and you don't want to keep going back and forth between your OneNotes or one of the third-party portals, this is the way to do it, at least as far as I'm concerned. So that's a kind of a neat tool for world building. But you can kind of use that as a foundation to build a large campaign, invite other people to contribute and that sort of thing, which is not something that you can inherently do in Fantasy Grounds without an extension or some kind of third-party tool. But I'll tell you a little bit about Biama, and I'll let you guys go. But essentially, going to start with her family. So her mom and dad were both unique individuals that had grown up in this Jaguar clan. And what had happened is that they both were kind of extreme circumstances as to how they survived and lived. So, for instance, Longtooth, the now chieftain, this was before he was chieftain, he was only about maybe 3 or 4 years old, and his father and him were out fishing along the river. Well, a storm came and kind of washed out the river and created this flood. It was like right around the rainy season when there's just torrential amounts of rain come down. And basically the river had swollen beyond its banks, and it was just full of, debris and mud. And they tried to get back to shore as quickly as possible, but they got wrapped up in this like whirlpool type thing. And they essentially almost drowned. Well, at least one of them did. So, one of the center supporting characters in this whole story arc is the Maguru, or the Maguro, and he's basically kind of like the clan elder. He was at the time, for a while he was the leader, but at this point in time, the Maguro is pretty young. He's still a young man, And he and his best friend were fishing, and his best friend happened to have his son along, who's like 4 years old, and that just happened to be Longtooth, the chieftain that's the chieftain now. So when Longtooth was 4 years old, his dad, his father, and his dad's best friend were all fishing, and those two got caught up on a boat during a big rainstorm during the rainy season. And essentially, what happened is the boat flipped over, and both of them fell out of the boat into the river. It was really fast moving. And this is like a flash flood that just kind of the skies opened up before they had time to get to shore. So the Maguru at the time, when he was young, he was on the shore checking their nets because they were fishing with nets and the boats and such. And he saw what happened, and he ran out there and swam out there to help them. And he had to make a choice between his best friend and the young boy. And he picked the young kid. And that guy that he had to let go, his best friend, was not an easy choice because that's someone he grew up with. That's someone he loved. That's like his brother almost. But there was a little child there who was only 4 years old. So he decided he would rescue the little boy who happens to turn into Longtooth, who's the chieftain now. But the Maguru rescued him. And about 3 or 4 years later, his mom passed away from a disease. So he kind of became orphaned. So he kind of became like the child of the village. Like everyone kind of raised him. But the Maguru was kind of like his guardian, like his, I guess, godfather or however you want to say. But he grew up under his tutelage, and he became a very powerful and strong hunter, very well liked, kind of a beloved, up and coming hunter. Everyone loved him. So that's Bayama's father. He grew up that way. So Bayama's mother was another story that kind of contributes to her story. So after this, incident with with the mother dying and all that stuff and growing up in the village, the Maguru also was out with some hunters. This is probably about 4 or 5 years later. And they came across a young woman who was tied to a tree by some vines. She's very beautiful. They have never seen anything like this. I mean, this woman was so attractive that it just stunned you. They could not figure it out. They thought she was an angel or a goddess or something. But anyway, she was tied to this tree. She didn't look like a goddess at that point. She's only like 12, maybe 11 years old. She was tied up to this tree, and they noticed that this area that she was in was disturbed, like there was something happened there. And what had happened is that her family was raided in their kingdom with these snake folk, which are basically kind of like this warriors that worship the serpents, and they're not very savory. And what their MO is, they'll go into villages and steal all the children and the women and the food, the resources, take them back, and do their things with them, and take their stuff basically, and they also abduct them into their culture and everything. So basically, she was going to be taken, and her and 2 others from her village were taken out, and it was kind of like a war, like a kind of like a raid, unsuspected raid. Anyways, so on their way back to their homeland or wherever they were going to take the Bayama's mother, Florita was her name, Florita. They were going to take her and a couple others back to their village. Well, they were camping one night, kind of celebrating, getting too drunk, basically getting wasted. And in the middle of the night, when they were kind of half passed out, they tied these guys up to the trees so they wouldn't get away. And so jaguars attacked them in the middle of the night and basically killed. There's 3 of them, or maybe 5, I don't remember, but there's 3 of them at least. And the jaguars took them out, like just right away, just took them all out. And then the others who were tied to the trees, they also got eaten or taken away by the jaguars, except for Florida. And the only reason they didn't take her is because they were full. They already had their fill of, their killings. And the other 2, the one was a little boy, and the other was a girl that was a couple years older than Florida. And those 2 were taken by the jaguar. So the 3 hunters that were the oppressors got taken out, and then 2 of her fellow villagers. Florida barely survived, and she was tied to that tree for a couple of days. I mean, she had soiled herself, and it was horrible. But anyways, the Maguru found her with his hunters, and at this time he was the clan leader. So he rescued her and brought her back to the Jaguar village, and they kind of took her in. They helped her, they cleaned her up, they let her heal and rest, and kind of get over the shock and the trauma. And they tried to communicate with her. They had a hard time talking to her because their languages weren't the same, and they essentially were, trying to figure her out, but they were kind of in awe on her, like how pretty she was. They couldn't figure that out, and then she was smart, and she knew things they didn't know, and because she had her own culture, and her people lived far away in these grasslands, so they weren't even the same. They even the same people, but essentially she kind of became uh, popular in their village in a way, but not necessarily in a positive way, because initially everyone was kind of in awe. They were in shock, and they were cool to her. But then after a while, the women started to get jealous of her because she was so beautiful and useful and nice and everything, and they're like, this is the ugliest woman we've ever seen, when it's really far from the truth. And they just got jealous, and they kind of accused her of being a witch, and they thought that she was charming the men and all kinds of stuff. So it was just horrible. They gave her all the chores. They treated her like shit, basically. And Florida just kind of, at first it was kind of horrible for her and really bad, but then she kind of hung in there and embraced her duties. She got really good at her chores that were really difficult. Like, they gave her all of the really crappy chores. Like, she had to go down to the river and grab water, which is really hard to do. So she'd bring gallons of water, to the village for cooking. They also gave her all the child care duties, like, she had to change all the diapers and all, all that kind of stuff. They gave her the shit work, really. And then when it came to food prep, they gave her a bunch of work to do there. And they would give her rotten food. They basically accused her of spreading lice and stuff in the village, so they made her cut her hair, and they did all kinds of mean stuff to her, very cruel. But since she kind of got kind of tough from that, and she kind of embraced that. And it got to the point where she got really strong and efficient, so she was able to do the water thing without a problem. They also had her starting the fires and such in the village, which you had to go collect wood, and it's a real pain in the butt. And she got good at that. And the children of the village loved her. So this treatment that she got from the women in the village kind of backfired on them. It pissed them off. So they were really furious. But anyhow, she grew up there. She kind of grew into her own, became a very utility and useful village person. Even though she was an outsider, she became valuable. And the men just adored her. They loved her. They thought she was, the next best thing. And it wasn't all lust. It was just kind of like they liked her because she was unique, because she had skills, because she was useful and different, So all this kind of worked to her favor in a way. But then when it got a little bit older, Longtooth kind of fell in love with her. They kind of hooked up, and they had customs then. So after the woman becomes a woman, or the girl becomes a woman, they have to wait a year before they can marry or do anything like that. So they were kind of talking for a bit there, and the women in the village did not like that. They're like, no, we don't want him to marry her. Everyone liked Longtooth. He was like the beloved son. So interesting enough, the Maguru was kind of stuck in the middle of this fighting, because they all were kind of mad, the women were, and they didn't want those two to be married. And the Maguru kind of thought of these two as his children, right? He found both of them in different circumstances and brought them together indirectly. And he had to kind of maintain a neutrality, because he was the leader at the time. So he kind of put his foot down and said, okay, you guys can't be together, not at least for a year. And you guys need to stay separated, because they caught him at the river. They were playing, they were swimming and stuff, and they were kind of close, and they were becoming friends. And one of the women in the village saw them and accused them of doing stuff, and it kind of pissed off the village. And it wasn't true. I mean, whoever narked on him was just totally jealous and not really being honest about what happened, but they were actually just in the river swimming together, and they were standing close to each other, and it looked like they were going to kiss or something like that, but nothing ever happened. And she yelled at him and said, "You guys can't do that." When you're a young teenager, how parents are about that. So they kind of busted her, her and Longtooth, and it kind of pissed them off too. Like Longtooth is really mad at the Maguro. He's like, "Why did you do this? You embarrassed us. You made us look like fools. Everyone in the village is questioning, me and my morals, and they make Florida look bad, and worse than she already had it." And so things just got ugly. So Florida actually self-exiled herself into the household of a young family who just had children. And she stayed there rather than going wherever she wanted. And she kind of just hid out inside their house for almost a year. She got really good at taking care of children. She helped the mom. The mom had another baby while she was there. I mean, she really stepped it up. She was there for probably almost 7-8 months. And she was trying to show that she was ready to be a mother and a wife. And she thought that by doing this, it would prove to the others that she was responsible and she wasn't just trying to bewitch the beloved hunter and all this other stuff. So she was really trying her best to basically be the right fit for this hunter who everyone loved. And they couldn't stand her. I mean, the men loved her, but the women of the village could not stand her. I mean, she's just too pretty, too perfect. They couldn't take it. So anyways, with all this mistreatment and stuff, it's a wonder that she stuck around, but she didn't have anywhere else to go, and her people were long gone and too far away, and she didn't remember where she lived actually in relations to the ground. Like, she didn't have directions to get back to her home. There was no roads. So she had to kind of suck it up and live there for a while, but eventually this hostility and this angst and stuff kind of built up. Like, it just got worse and worse. And once the women found out that she was actually benefiting from her punishment, they got really mad and jealous, and they just kept screwing with her. They kept calling her names and, throwing stuff at her and giving her rotten food and all kinds of stuff. They were just so mean to her. They're trying to get her to leave. And that's kind of what the intent was, I think, was to get her to leave or kill herself or whatever. They didn't like her. So during this time, one of the friends of the Maguro, one of the elders in the village, suggested that the men go out on a hunt, and they do this twice a year. So it's kind of like after the rainy season. There's 2 rainy seasons. They go out and they hunt, and that's basically the weather there. It's either rain or no rain. And the wet season is an important part because it replenishes everything, washes everything, and kind of everything is anew. So he said, why don't we do this hunt? Bring some of the young hunters so we can test them out, all that sort of thing. So the Maguro thought that's a really good idea. It helps shift the focus away from this fighting. It separates these two, and it also allows them to train and, to get stuff, because they didn't just go out and hunt. Like, they collected exotic plants, exotic stones and crystals and that sort of thing. And they would bring it home to their wives and their kids. It was almost like Christmas time. Like, when the men would come back from the hunt, and this is like a 10-day expedition. When they'd come back, they'd bring food and trinkets and all kinds of really cool stuff and rare things that they needed for medicine and all kinds of stuff. So it was a good thing for them to go on this trip. And it's kind of to break the tension in the village. So the men go out on this expedition. But it didn't go right. So the Maguro, Longtooth, he was only probably about 17 at the time. Maguro was probably in his 30s, late 30s. And the other elder guy was around the same age, and he had his son with him. And then they had maybe 6 or 7 other hunters with them. So they were bringing the young men out to test their mettle and, to go hunting and to do their expedition. About 3 days into the jungle, they came across a wild pride of jaguars. And these jaguars happen to have young cubs nearby. And they didn't know that, but the young hunters stumbled into this den of jaguars, and it was, towards the end of the day. It was starting to be sundown. This is when the jaguars start waking up. So, they're hungry, and that they're territorial, and they're defending their young. So they attacked the hunters, and the guy who had suggested to go on this hunt, he and his son were the first to go down. So the jaguars jumped on him, knocked him on the ground, pounced on him. The young boy drug him off into the jungle, and the father, of course, tried to help him. He got attacked and thrashed and everything. He kind of made it through, but not really. I mean, he got wounded really bad. And then the Maguru showed up, the leader of the time, and he basically tried to get try to attack the jaguars and get them to leave. And he saw that Longfang had one of the jaguars on top of him. Basically was on his back, essentially, and is trying to maul him and scratch him all up. And the Maguru hit him with a spear and wounded it. So it took off, it self-preservation, right? It got stabbed pretty good in the side with the spear, and it was like, okay, I'm done. So it let go of the Longtooth before he got wounded. But during this time, Longtooth was stunned, like he was never had this kind of intense fight. So he was kind of battle stunned. If you ever been in a fight and you got all that adrenaline going, you can imagine this is all happening really fast. So they're watching their friends being drug off in the underbrush by these jaguars, and essentially the Maguru had gone through and tried to rescue Longtooth and the other hunters. But in the process of doing so, he too had succumbed to attack. I mean, there's like 7 jaguars or something like that, adults, and probably like 2 or 3 cubs. It was like an alpha female, like 3 or 4 males and a couple young females. I mean, they were hungry. There was a big pack of them, essentially. But they got the Maguru. They jumped on his back and, knocked him down and drug him off. And he was screaming and stuff. And the young hunter of the Longtooth, it wasn't his name until this encounter, but when he got up, he saw that the Maguru was hurt and was getting attacked, and he was going to do something, but the Maguru told him to get help before that. So he said, well, it's either I help him, and put myself at risk, or I go get the other. So he ran. He froze for a minute, and then he ran. And he felt so bad, that guilt, that he left his fellow hunters and he left his mentor, right, the Maguru. But he decided, I'm going to do what he said earlier and go get the hunter. So he went really quick, and this was like less than a minute. Went and got the other ones. He called out, said, come over here, help us, And so they get over there, and the Maguru's gone. They see the blood and all the, the foliage is all messed up. They asked him what happened, and he was kind of in shock. He couldn't really talk very well. And one of the hunters said, hey, you're a hero. You survived. They see that he's got all these cuts and scratches and bruises on him and bite marks. And they found a tooth lodged in his leg, a broken tooth from one of the jaguars. And that's how he got the Longtooth name, was because of this encounter. So he was slated as this big hero just by circumstance. Wasn't even true, right? It was just a really something that happened in under 5 minutes, and it just kind of stuck with him, and he became like this hero. And the hunters were really looking for a positive spin on their expedition. They didn't want to go home and say, hey, we got our asses kicked by these jaguars, and we don't even know why they attacked us. That's our totem animal. And it would be like a bad sign. Like if they're attacked by the jaguars, that means they're bad people and that they don't deserve to live and all this other stuff. There's this, like, superstitious things involved too. So they were kind of looking for a good positive thing. So one of them said, hey, you're a hero. Let's go back. So let's gather what we got and let's head back. And let's tell them that, we lost some of our villagers, but You had fended them off, and that you tried to rescue them, and all this stuff. So they kind of built him up as this hero when really he wasn't. He was ashamed. He was embarrassed. He had PTSD. He was not ready for that. This is like a war thing, right? Like if you ever been in a war, and for your first time, this is a really traumatic event, and just the trauma of it. And he was wounded too. I mean, he just about died too. The guy that initially tried to save his son, he was part way alive when the hunters got there, but he was bleeding out, and he tried to point to his son, but he was so delirious and almost dead that he was pointing to Longfang, who he mistakenly thought that was his son, but it wasn't, and he was dying, so he didn't know what was going on. That's kind of why the hunters of the village thought that he was a hero, because he probably assumed that he fended off the jaguars, and the Longtooth went along with it because he was in shock. And I don't think initially he meant to be a liar. I think he just kind of went along with it because he knew that if they went back empty-handed, or they kind of went back in defeat, that would be very demoralizing. And he knows that that's horrible, bad luck. And he kind of went along with it, and he lived this lie. And when he got back, he became the village elder by de facto. Like they appointed him to be the leader about a couple weeks later. The Maguru was gone. Those two other hunters were dead, and they didn't know. They assumed the Maguru was dead, but they made him the leader, and the Maguru became the chieftain. That's how he became it. The Maguru was older and more wise and more experienced, but he was dead, and they needed somebody strong to take over the village. So at least they thought he was dead. So this went on, and those two married. Actually, after he came back and he became the leader, he immediately went after her. He married her. They had a little honeymoon period for a couple months. She got pregnant right away, and they started fighting and not getting along after that. And it just kind of went downhill from there. And Florida was pregnant with Bayama, and it wasn't a very good time for her. She didn't do well with motherhood, and he turned into this raging kind of lunatic. The fact of the matter is that he was actually dealing with stress, PTSD, trauma, embarrassment, shame, all that. He was living with guilt. And I don't know if you've ever lived with guilt, but that is a really powerful, ugly thing to have to deal with. And this is going on for months, So he had to live with that guilt, and he lived in this lie that he was this hero when he really wasn't. He was a coward, to be honest. But he kind of filled into that role because he felt like he had to do that for the village and everything. And then he got the girl and everything. And so he figured, he was doing the right thing, but he really wasn't. And about 3 months after all this stuff went down, and maybe a little longer than that, but Florida was already pregnant with Bayama. The Maguru returns. He comes back in this half-crazed, kind of disfigured look, like he's half dead. He basically almost died. He lived only by luck, and when he died, he had this weird, like, I don't know, like a near-death experience, and he was kind of been shown indirectly through the spirit world, or whatever he thought, or whatever he experienced, that he was supposed to live, and that he would protect this child, an unborn child. He didn't know at the time what that meant, but how he survived is when he was drugged back to the pride where they had their nest or their lair. The jaguars dropped him off. He was pretty mauled, and he was put inside of a den with these young cubs. And when he got in there, the cubs were feeding on one of the hunters, and he was half dead, but he can hear these little cubs chewing on the bones of his fellow hunters, gnawing on an arm or a leg or something like that. So he was half dead inside of this den, And the jaguars at the time were out hunting, and he could come and go like in and out of consciousness. But for some reason, he was able to live, and he crawled out of that den when the jaguars were gone, and the cubs were too little to do much to him. And one of them tried to follow him. And anyway, so the cubs kind of stayed around, and he ended up finding this creek, and he kind of rolled into it, and that cleaned his wounds and kind of gave him water, and also it kind of hid his scent. So when the jaguars came back, they couldn't find him because he was rinsed away by the creek, and he kind of stayed in the creek for a while. I want to say for like a day and a half. He was kind of camped out underneath this little embankment, and he saw the jaguars looking for him. I mean, they were looking, sniffing around the shores. They were trying to find him, and he was kind of hiding out and just freaked out. He was half alive and barely living, and he just kind of fixed himself. Like he ate these like mushrooms, and he like lived off the land and ate fish, raw fish, and all kinds of stuff. So he was kind of hanging out in this creek, and it kind of helped restore him. And he made his way back to the village. And when he got back there, everyone was shocked that he had returned. So they were all happy, but then they saw how disfigured he was. Like half his face was gone. I mean, it was pretty ugly. His entire chest was shredded up. I mean, he looked like hell. They're like, yeah, so I don't think you could be the leader. We've appointed this Longtooth to be the leader. And when he came back, Longtooth was petrified. He was scared. He's like, oh shit, he's gonna say something. He's gonna tell them that what really happened. But the truth is that the Maguru loved him, and he wouldn't do that to him. But he was so out of it, and a near-death experience changed him so much that he had forgotten a lot of what really went down. The only thing he remembered was that he was supposed to protect this child, and that the gods have given him a second chance at life, and that his purpose was set, and all this other stuff. So he had the spiritual thing going on. So anyways, once that kind of smoothed over, the village elders and the Longtooth decided to give him a title. They said, you're now the wise man, you're the medicine man, you're the spiritual leader. That's the best we can do for you, and still retain your honor, and still be used as counsel and for guidance and stuff. So he accepted it, but he had a condition. He said, look, I don't remember much of what went down, and I don't think it's the way it was told, but if you allow me to be the godfather of your child and let me be involved with raising this child, then I will step down without any problems, and I will help you and your wife, or Florida, and I'll do what you say. So that's kind of how Bayama was brought to forth. So when she was born, the Maguru helped Florida, and they became friends when Bayama got older, and Bayama took care of him in his older years. So it was kind of like a friendship that had happened by fate, by divine intervention, however you want to say it, luck. But that's basically how Bayama came to be. Was her parents were kind of unique. They had different experiences and different events that had occurred that brought them to where they were at. And there's a lot of other things that went down after she was born. Like the Florida and Longtooth wanted a son, and they tried for a while, and they tried and they tried. They finally had one when Bayama was, I want to say 4 or 5, and they were so happy and everything was good. And one day the mom, Florida, and Bayama were down by the river getting water, and the little boy disappeared, and they weren't sure what happened to it. But he was in like this little bassinet type thing that was made out of reeds and grass and stuff, and they turned their backs for like 2 seconds, and then he was gone. They couldn't figure out what happened to him. They looked all over for him. They thought he'd fallen into the river, but because the basket was laying on its side. But what they didn't know was that some monkeys had come by and picked him up, and they took off with him playfully and kind of mischievously. Bayama noticed the monkeys in the trees, but she was too young to really make that connection. But she saw them, in the trees, and they were playing and jumping around, and she kind of suspected maybe they had something to do with it. But being that she was so young, she just kind of pointed up in the trees, and her mom's like, "Help me find him," And so they were frantic, and she ran back to the village to tell the others that Little Paw was her brother's name, that he was missing. So they all came to help her out, and Bayama kept saying that there was monkeys in the trees, and they didn't really think about it, or they didn't believe her. But she saw a jaguar cross her path when she ran back to the village, and it looked at her. It didn't do anything to her. It just it stopped, it turned and looked at her, and then it ran off, and it was actually chasing the monkeys. And Bayama was like, "Oh, they're hunting for these monkeys," And then she ran off to the village to get them to help find Little Paw, her little brother. And when the whole thing shook down, basically, Florida, Bayama's mom, was accused of being neglectful. They thought that she had killed the boy or drowned him or neglected him so that she could get back at her husband, which is the tyrannical, the Longtooth, who had become this like just crazy hunter dude, menacing, mean, evil guy, and so they thought that Florida had done something to the child, or that she was neglectful. So they basically threw stones at her and outcast her from the village for that, because they're like, this is the heir to the village, and you lost him or you did something to him. They couldn't prove it, but they certainly couldn't figure out where he went. There was no footprints or anything, so they couldn't figure it out. But I think Bayama kind of knew what happened, but being that she was so young, she couldn't really explain that. And that's really what really started this really horrible tragedy of how Bayama was raised. And she got a little older, a lot more weird stuff happened, and her dad was just lecherous. And when her mother was outcast from the village, she kind of went crazy and left too. She left herself. So basically, when you come to the adventure, you find Bayama by herself with her jaguar pet, and she's out in the wild and staying away from her father because he's just a creep. And he's getting ready to raid this village, and you have to help her get across the river. And the river is not small. It's like the Amazon River. It'd take you half an hour to swim across if you could even do it. And it's a long. So that was basically the story. Like, this all just came up from being, just a character that I was making up, and this whole thing just kind of came up from that. And it kind of spiraled into this story about who she was and how she came to be, and her history and her family and her people. And I even have like the whole culture thing figured out. Like, there's like 5 clans in the Jaguar clans, and there's a main clan and there's these offshoots, and then they live kind of close to the river. And the river feeds into like a large river where the Orinoco River or something like that, and then it goes into the Amazon. But it's similar to that, but nonetheless, it's just huge story thing, and I've got this whole like almost like a novel figured out. But nonetheless, I'm making the assets for this and telling this story because I hope to inspire you guys to kind of do your own, right? Like, I got this whole thing where when the players come to this area, they meet her, they find out a little bit about her. They don't learn all that stuff that I told you, but they learn a little bit about her, how unique she is, and how she kind of is in tune with this jaguar. And they have to rescue the jaguar as one of the missions. The other mission, of course, is to go across the river. And then the final mission is that they find her father's hunters, like 3 of them that were out looking for her, are captured by the snake folk, traditional enemies kind of thing. or that don't come around very often. When they do, they're trouble. So they have to liberate those guys, and they say they'll go back to the village and they won't say anything that they saw Bayama, but they do say something. But so there's little adventures that are kind of centered around the environment and a little bit around her backstory, but it doesn't touch all that history, that deep lore. But at least she's defined, like she has a history, she has a purpose, she has a a family and people that supported her and people that are after her, and all that stuff. And then the other part of it was to go into the jungle and warn somebody about the snake people, and they meet up with these sentient gorilla-like people. I just call them the gorillans. I don't have a good name for them, but they're essentially like a anthropomorphic ape gorilla-like folk that have intelligence. I guess you could say it's kind of like Planet of the Apes, but not quite. But they basically guard this one area that you have to go through to get to this valley. And in that valley is these ruins that had been destroyed long ago by a meteor that had crashed into the jungles. And the meteor had this core, which is kind of like a corrupting force, I guess you can call it. Like I don't know, they call it the heart of the jungle, but it's actually almost like an alien artifact. And basically it transformed those ancient people into these like plant zombie like things. And it's just this whole like campaign where it's in steps where like you get all your assets, you get your knowledge, you get all your stuff and your supplies and resources, and then you go on these quests with Bayama to kind of get her to know her a little bit. And then after that, you go on a bigger quest on behest of the Maguru, and the Maguru is almost dead, like he's on his last days. And he's a friend of hers, and he protects her and kind of watches out for her. But he's also now at this point, he's kind of like an old hermit, and he kind of lives on the outskirts of their village. And he occasionally comes across Bayama, and she helps him out and stuff. But he tells them about this star worm, is what they call it, and this was a meteor that had fallen, thousands of years ago. But he knew a little bit about it, and that the jungle's changed and that something's going down. And he tells them about this ruin that his elders or his brothers or something had come across long ago. And you go on this quest, and that's when you meet the gorilla people, and you end up going to this long lost culture that had this megalithic city, and it's destroyed, but it's a ruin, and it basically becomes like a little dungeon crawl. And then you fight this creature that's kind of like a dragon, but it's the star worm is what they call it, and it's kind of infused with like this negative energy or this alien like energy. And there's some kind of weird like virus or something, like you can't breathe it in, but if you touch somebody, it's contagious, so it spreads. So that's another thing that's going on. And the snake people want this artifact, and so do the monkey people. So they're fighting, or the gorilla people. So they're kind of in a civil war about it. And I don't know. It's a big, long, drawn out thing. But that's essentially what this is leading to, is that kind of like a campaign setting / adventure, and then maybe a small gazetteer like thing. Like maybe you're going to build up this, the background, the history, the NPCs, the monsters, all that stuff. But for the time being, I'm using the adventure or the monsters called Latin American Monsters. It's on the Fantasy Grounds store. And this is, I think, Legendary Games. And this has a whole bunch of themed NPCs that are, here's the great jaguar cat. So, that's kind of what I'll model this after. But she's not going to be, Shadow isn't going to be this great jaguar cat, but she'll have something similar to this. But yeah, this is a really cool thing to have. And then, of course, the jungle maps and, the artwork and the music and all that stuff. All that stuff goes into telling the story. And, so this is your Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening storytelling time. But hopefully you enjoyed that. I don't know if you guys care about that kind of stuff or not, but I do show a little bit of stuff along the way, like how to do this and that, and shared that music with you. This was I made this on Udio, which is a newer app that has art, or not art, but music capabilities. And the original I made was in Spanish, and I think I'll end it with this. So you guys have a good one, and I'll kind of use this as the outro music. So take care, you guys. Bye-bye.
Retornaron al corazón verde, su hogar amado, marcando las piedras, cuentan su paso en Chiribiquete, el eco sagrado. Hija del río, alma del agua, su espíritu canta con la cascada, belleza eterna, naturaleza, en sus venas corre la selva espesa. Mira junto al agua.
Oh, Balama. Oh, Balama, princesa Balama. Oh, Balama. Oh, Balama, princesa de los jaguares. En sombras creció, entre espinas andó, pero como el jaguar fuerte se mostró. De las pruebas salió, con el sol se alzó, su historia en las piedras ella grabó. Balama la grande, de fama inmortal, como petroglifos, su mito es real. Hija del río, voz del jaguar, su nombre en la brisa siempre perdurará. Balama, la grande, de fama inmortal, como petroglifos, su mito es real. Hija del río, voz del jaguar, su nombre en la brisa siempre perdurará.
Oh, Bala.